The Naturocrit Podcast.
What are you even talking about?
Welcome to As That Robot Voice Says, the Naturocrit Podcast, and thank you for boldly listening. What are we even talking about? Well, this podcast series is my take on naturopathic medicine, an area I've been studying for about 34 years, including my time in so-called scientific, non-sectarian naturopathic medical school. My approach is a pairing of scientific skepticism and a deep knowledge of naturopathy's intimate details. In previous episodes of this series, I established that naturopathy is essentially a kind of knowledge blending, misrepresentation, and irrationality. I have termed naturopathy both an epistemic conflation, falsely posing itself as an epistemic delineation, and the naturopathological. The science exterior is mixed with what is scientific. Then, that whole muddle is absurdly claimed to be science as an entire category, while particular sectarian science-ejected oath obligations and requirements are coded or camouflaged, therein effectively disguising naturopathy's system of beliefs in public view. Naturopathy's ultimate achievement is a profound erosion of scientific integrity and freedom of belief, packaged in the marketing veneers natural, holistic, integrative, and alternative, and improperly embedded in the academic category, science. Synopsis. In this Naturocrit Podcast, Episode 17, also known as Season 2, Episode 7, I'll cover a new 2026 study on the practices of Connecticut naturopaths, which I have titled, quote, a CSF Framework Evaluative Analysis of 107 licensed Connecticut naturopaths' practices in relation to science, ethics, commerce, and freedom, unquote. The four main parts of this episode are the 2026 study's polished report, the 2026 study's final report, follow-up questions as a formal section, and a rather long conclusion section. This Part C will include the final report and a follow-up check of that report titled, quote, Appendix to Episode 17 Part C's final report, unquote. The final report, formally titled, quote, Connecticut Naturopathic Licensure Analysis, Cullen-Snyder Framework Applied to Chapter 373 and Public Act 14-231, unquote. Quote, Executive Summary. Connecticut General Statutes, Chapter 373, as modernized by Public Act 14-231, establishes a legal and regulatory framework that structurally enables licensed naturopathic physicians, NDs, to present pseudoscientific practices as state-recognized healthcare. When analyzed through the Cullen-Snyder Framework, CSF, which integrates critical epistemology, Cullen, and political philosophy on freedom, Snyder, this licensure law produces systematic harms across both epistemic and freedom-based dimensions that harm individual patients and corrode public health institutions. This report, 1. Applies the Cullen-Snyder framework to Connecticut's ND licensure law and documented ND practices. 2. Details concrete harms enabled by Chapter 373 and PA 14-231, organized by CSF dimensions. 3. Constitutes a profile of Connecticut's revealed state values and postures regarding naturopathy licensure, showing how statutory choices choices and regulatory allowances reflect particular institutional commitments to legitimizing non-evidence-based practices. 4. Provides a template for legislative testimony, regulatory rulemaking, and policy advocacy. Part 1, the Cullen-Snyder Framework, Definition, Components, and Implementation in Connecticut Context. Framework Foundations. The Cullen-Snyder Framework synthesizes two intellectual traditions. Cullen epistemic critique. Cullen's analysis of pseudoscience identifies epistemic conflation, the deliberate or structural blending of scientific and non-scientific claims as a threat to knowledge integrity and consequently to freedom. Cullen notes that institutions play a role in either reinforcing or eroding the boundary between science and pseudoscience. Snyder Political Philosophy. Tim Snyder's work on freedom, 2024, identifies 5 dimensions of human liberty essential to functioning democratic societies. Sovereignty. Real autonomy based on accurate information, not manipulation or misinformation. Unpredictability. Life outcomes reasonably connected to evidence and chance, not arbitrary or hidden forces. Mobility. Realistic options and ability to move between life paths without structural constraint. Factuality. Access to shared, verifiable truth as a precondition for collective decision-making. Solidarity. Social commitment to collective welfare and evidence-based standards. The CSF merges these by showing that pseudoscientific practice, institutionally encoded in law, degrades both epistemic integrity and freedom across all 5 dimensions. Key CSF analytical components. A. Epistemic profile, Cullen-based. Science Camouflage Index measures the proportion of science exterior claims presented as science-based. In Connecticut ND practice, this index is elevated because statute defines naturopathy as the science, art, and practice of healing by natural methods. NDs use titles, doctor, naturopathic physician, ND licensed, that create presumption of scientific training. Marketing materials blend evidence-based elements, nutrition, lifestyle with pseudoscience, homeopathy, energy medicine, vitalism, without epistemically differentiating them. Patients reasonably infer scientific parity with MD, medical doctor, /DO care. Institutional Legitimacy Score assesses the degree to which a practice receives state backing relative to its evidentiary support. In Connecticut, this score is artificially inflated because licensure grants regulatory status comparable to other health professions despite weaker educational standards. CNME, Council on Naturopathic Medical Education Recognition, cited in statute as basis for scope and authority, though CNME curriculum includes vitalism, homeopathy, constitutional hydrotherapy, modalities lacking evidence base, inclusion on state-licensed provider lists, insurance panels, hospital networks, creates false parity with evidence-based professions. B. Freedom Impact Matrix, Snyder-based. Each of Snyder's 5 freedoms is affected by the mechanisms enabled by Chapter 373. This is a table of 4 columns. Freedom dimension, definition, how Connecticut licensure undermines it, concrete harm mechanism. Freedom dimension, factuality, definition, access to shared verifiable truth, how Connecticut ND licensure undermines it, statutory encoding of naturopathy as science when many core modalities, homeopathy, meridian-based acupuncture, energy healing, lack demonstrated efficacy. Concrete harm mechanism. Patients cannot distinguish validated therapies from pseudoscience. Misrepresented knowledge base prevents informed truth-seeking. Freedom dimension. Sovereignty. Definition. Autonomous choice grounded in accurate information. How Connecticut ND licensure undermines it. Informed consent compromised by science camouflage. Omitted risk disclosures, inflated efficacy claims, and misrepresented scope of practice. Concrete harm mechanism. Patients choose use based on false epistemic premises, consent procedures satisfied but material understanding degraded. Freedom dimension, unpredictability. Definition, life outcomes reasonably connected to evidence and probability. How Connecticut ND licensure undermines it. Wide latitude in ND scope creates variable, non-standardized diagnostic and treatment pathways without evidential anchoring. Concrete harm mechanism, same symptoms yield different testing and treatments. Prognosis contingent on provider rather than disease biology. Outcomes become unpredictable. Freedom dimension, mobility. Definition, realistic options, and meaningful exit from constrained pathways. How Connecticut licensure undermines it. Licensure creates apparent equivalence with primary care. Misleading patients. Licensed status increases normalization. Exit costlier. Concrete harm mechanism. Patients believe they are exercising choice when they are entering constrained care pathways. Early diversion delays access to effective options. Freedom dimension, solidarity. Definition, collective commitment to shared evidence standards and population welfare. How Connecticut ND licensure undermines it. Public health norms, vaccination, screening, guideline-based treatment compete with state-licensed practitioners promoting alternative narratives. Concrete harm mechanism. Institutional erosion, vaccine hesitancy, resource misallocation, regulatory capture, vulnerable groups disproportionately harmed. Part 2, Structural Harms Enabled by Chapter 373, PA 14-231. A detailed CSF-grounded analysis. Roman numeral 1. Epistemic harms, science camouflage, and institutional legitimacy. Harm category, elevated science camouflage index via statutory definition. Mechanism enabled by Connecticut law. Connecticut General Statutes 20-34 defines naturopathy as the science, art, and practice of healing by natural methods and ties scope to CNME-recognized naturopathic medical education. This formulation does 3 problematic things. 1. Grants legislative status to science without independent evidentiary validation. 2. Outsources epistemic standards to naturopathic professional bodies rather than independent scientific institutions. 3. Permits scope of practice authority, diagnosis, treatment, lab ordering, grounded in naturopathic philosophy rather than validated medical knowledge. Concrete harms to patients. Homeopathy. Connecticut licensed NDs market homeopathic remedies alongside evidence-based treatments. Homeopathy is diluted beyond Avogadro's number, lacks plausible mechanism, and systematic reviews find efficacy indistinguishable from placebo, yet licensed status implies scientific grounding. Energy medicine and meridians. NDs describe meridians as channels for qi and claim acupuncture works by unblocking energy flow. Some observed effects of acupuncture are hypothesized to involve peripheral nerve stimulation without validating meridian theory. Yet, statutory recognition of naturopathic medicine embeds pre-scientific meridian theory within a licensed medical system. Vitalism. Naturopathic education emphasizes innate healing power and inherent wisdom of the body. Vitalist philosophy rejected by biology. This is presented to patients as medical science under licensure. Detoxification. NDs promote undefined toxins and offer expensive detoxification programs, foot baths, supplements, saunas. Human liver and kidneys perform detoxification through characterized enzymatic pathways. Detox supplements lack evidence for enhanced clearance. CSF impact. Factuality and sovereignty. Factuality. Shared understanding of what constitutes science is institutionally blurred. Public literacy about fact/non-fact boundaries erodes. Sovereignty. Patients reasonably assume licensed NDs offer science-based care equivalent to MDs, medical doctors. This assumption, enabled by licensure, prevents autonomous, informed choice. Harm category. Institutional legitimacy inflation via licensure parity. Mechanism enabled by Connecticut law. PA 14-231 modernized Chapter 373 by explicitly authorizing NDs to diagnose disease, prevent disease, treat disease, and promote optimum health and wellness. This language creates a de facto primary care status while statute maintains bans on prescribing pharmaceuticals or performing surgery. The result: NDs function as first contact clinicians for serious conditions, pediatrics, oncology, psychiatry, without equivalent training. Broadly, as a national goal, such states' licensure integrates NDs into hospital networks, insurance panels, continuing medical education tables, normalizing them as peer professionals. Future scope expansions. Prescriptive authority, injective privileges are rhetorically justified by citing existing licensure as precedent. Concrete harms to patients. From analyzed Connecticut licensed ND practices, pediatric autism claims, one ND marketed Defeat Autism Now, DAN protocols, chelation therapy, extreme supplements, unvalidated diagnostic testing to parents of autistic children. Licensure created presumption of pediatric expertise despite absence of developmental neurology training. Chelation carries risk of kidney/liver damage and cardiac complications. Oncology claims. Another ND offered integrative naturopathic oncology, including homeopathy, spiritual healing, and botanical medicine, as co-equal with guideline-based chemotherapy/radiation for cancer. Licensure created false parity with oncology training, despite ND education containing no residency oncology experience. Functional testing and root cause diagnosis. NDs order expensive functional medicine panels, IgG food testing, Dutch hormone panels, expensive microbiome testing, SIBO breath testing, marketed as identifying root causes not detectable by conventional medicine. Many of these tests lack clinical validation. Licensure implies credentialed diagnostic judgment. CSF impact. Sovereignty and mobility. Sovereignty. Patients consent to care under assumption of regulatory equivalence that does not exist. Institutional halo of licensure creates false epistemic conditions for consent. Mobility. Patients who select NDs as primary contacts, believing in parity, become trapped in care pathways that cannot deliver evidence-based diagnosis or medication management. Early diversion narrows actual access to effective options despite appearing to expand choice. Roman numeral 2, freedom harms. Snyder's 5 freedoms systematically undermined. Factuality, the informational foundation of freedom. How Chapter 373, PA 14-231 undermine access to truth. 1. Statutory encoding of pseudoscience as science. Law defines naturopathy as science without evidentiary validation. CNME curriculum embeds homeopathy, vitalism, energy medicine. These become state licensed as science. Patients cannot rely on licensed as a marker of science-based practice. 2. Misrepresentation of diagnostic scope. Connecticut law authorizes naturopathic physicians to diagnose, prevent, and treat disease, but this authority is not tied to evidence-based diagnostic standards or residency-level medical training. NDs routinely market themselves as licensed primary care doctors or physicians without disclosing the limits of their training. Scope, for example, lack of prescriptive authority, hospital admitting privileges or specialty training, or the non-evidence-based nature of many naturopathic diagnostic frameworks, such as functional panels and non-standard Lyme testing. Patients therefore receive a systematically distorted picture of what ND diagnostic authority entails. They correctly infer that NDs are licensed to diagnose, but incorrectly infer parity with MD, medical doctor/DO, diagnostic competence and tools, which corrupts the informational basis of consent. 3. Absence of risk and efficacy disclosure. Analyzed ND marketing uniformly omits limitations of evidence, risks of unproven treatments, situations requiring conventional medical evaluation, comparative effectiveness data. Licensure makes these omissions feel endorsed by the state. Concrete example, thermography and breast cancer. One Connecticut ND marketed digital infrared thermography as alternative to mammography for breast cancer screening. claims early detection, no radiation, identifies heat patterns of disease. Note, this is an example of licensure-enabled risk, not of a common practice. Scientific reality, thermography is not validated for breast cancer screening. Medical societies explicitly state it should not replace mammography. Licensure effect, patients assume state-licensed clinician would not market unvalidated screening. They forego mammography and delay detection. Factuality harm. Access to shared, accurate understanding of what thermography is and is not is compromised. Sovereignty, real autonomy requires accurate premises. How Chapter 373, PA 14-231 corrupts informed consent. 1. Title and credential inflation. NDs use doctor, naturopathic physician, and primary care doctor. Patients assume doctor means medical doctor /DO level training. Actual training, 4 years post-bachelor in naturopathic program versus 4 years of medical school plus 3 to 7 years of residency. Law permits these titles without mandatory disclaimers. 2. Therapeutic misconception. NDs describe themselves as providing comprehensive integrative medicine, primary care, root cause diagnosis. Marketed modalities are presented without evidence-level differentiation. Evidence-supported, lifestyle modification, some herbs, certain supplements for deficiency. Evidence-mixed, acupuncture for some pain conditions. No evidence. Homeopathy, energy healing, most detoxification, constitutional hydrotherapy, IgG-driven dietary restriction. Blending, without differentiation, creates false impression. All are evidence comparable. 3. Financial conflicts of interest embedded in practice structure. NDs order tests generating revenue, functional testing, supplement analysis. NDs sell supplements, often through integrated dispensaries. Licensure creates presumption of objectivity, masking financial incentive structure. Patients cannot accurately assess whether recommendations serve patient interest or revenue. Concrete example, IgG food testing. ND orders comprehensive IgG food sensitivity testing, $200 to $500. Results show positive for common foods, dairy, gluten, eggs. ND recommends elimination diet and supplements, $100+ a month. Reality, IgG testing lacks scientific validity. IgG antibodies to foods represent normal immune tolerance, not pathology. Dietary elimination based on IgG results shows no better outcomes than placebo, yet licensure makes patient assume clinical judgment is based on evidence. Sovereignty harm. Patient consent to expensive testing and restrictive diet under false understanding of test validity. Autonomy is formally intact, but substantively corrupted. Unpredictability. Outcomes contingent on non-evidence-based variation. How Chapter 373 creates treatment variability without evidential anchor. Wide scope authority, diagnosis, any natural treatment method, lab ordering, permits NDs to construct idiosyncratic treatment bundles with no standardized evidence-based protocols. Example 1. Patient with fatigue and brain fog presents to ND number 1, receives thyroid labs, B12 testing, nutritional counseling, magnesium supplement, outcome improved. Example 2. Same presentation to ND number 2, receives Dutch hormone panel, IgG food testing, detoxification program, homeopathic constitutional remedy, outcome unchanged or worsened. Same condition, vastly different diagnostic and treatment pathways, none tethered to validated protocols. Concrete example, chronic Lyme disease diagnosis. One CTND marketed expertise in chronic Lyme disease and ordered Igenix Western blot, not validated by CDC or CDC standard Lyme testing protocols. Based on this non-standard test, ND prescribed extended herbal antimicrobial protocols, restrictive diets, supplements with no Lyme disease evidence base, discouragement of standard antibiotic therapy. Result, patient with seronegative Lyme, false positive on non-standard test, subjected to lengthy, expensive, ineffective naturopathic care while avoiding antibiotic therapy for actual Lyme infection if present. Unpredictability harm. Patient cannot reasonably predict or plan health outcomes. Prognosis depends on non-evidence-based provider variation rather than disease biology. Mobility. Apparent choice, actual constraint. How Chapter 373 narrows real healthcare options while appearing to expand them. 1. Licensed ND as de facto primary care. Statute allows NDs to diagnose and treat disease. Licensure permits first contact role and independent lab ordering. Patients believe ND as primary care is equivalent to medical doctor primary care. In reality, ND cannot prescribe, cannot admit to hospital, cannot perform procedures, has not completed emergency/critical care training. Patients seeking help for serious symptoms, chest pain, severe infection, acute psychiatric crisis, within ND office faces constrained options. 2. Diversion from guideline-based pathways. Patients with undiagnosed diabetes may spend months on ND metabolic balancing protocols while A1C rises. Children with undiagnosed ADHD may spend years on ND behavioral protocols while untreated ADHD affects academic and social development. Patients with early cancer may delay staging and oncology referral while pursuing naturopathic immune support. Licensure normalizes ND as legitimate alternative path, increases likelihood of diversion. 3. Locked-in costs and network effects. Once patient has invested time and money in ND care, sunk costs make exit more difficult. ND network referrals to naturopathic massage, supplements, testing reinforce ecosystem. Patients without insurance may choose ND, no insurance required, over medical doctor. Insurance costs are high out of pocket, locking in constrained access. Licensure legitimacy increases this network effect. It seems like a real system. CSF impact on mobility. While Snyder defines mobility as real options and meaningful exit, licensure creates apparent expansion, ND as option, coupled with actual constraint. ND cannot deliver full-spectrum care. Early diversion from guideline-based pathways narrows effective option set. Solidarity. Collective health standards eroded. How Chapter 373 weakens public health norms and social commitment to evidence. 1. Vaccination hesitancy. Licensed NDs in Connecticut marketing materials explicitly question vaccine safety, frame vaccines as toxin exposure, position natural immunity as superior. NDs positioned as independent diagnosticians can present vaccine injury as plausible etiology for autism and neurodevelopmental conditions in routine pediatric encounters. State licensure lends credibility to anti-vaccine narratives. Result: vaccine hesitancy, local declines in immunization, erosion of herd immunity protecting immunocompromised individuals. 2. Institutional erosion and regulatory capture. Once ND licensure exists, profession has stable platform for lobbying scope expansions. Recent efforts in Connecticut to expand ND prescriptive authority leveraged existing licensure as evidence of readiness. Public health and medical organizations must continuously expend resources opposing expansions that pose substantial risk. This consumes attention from other public health priorities. 3. Resource misallocation and inequality. Naturopathic care is often out of pocket. Vulnerable populations, low income, less health literacy, prior negative experiences with mainstream care are targeted by natural medicine marketing. Patients with limited resources may forego evidence-based care, medication, specialist consultation to afford expensive unvalidated testing and supplements. Institutionalizing ND through licensure, advantaged patients can access both. Disadvantaged must choose. Concrete example: pediatric asthma. One Connecticut ND marketed natural asthma management, emphasizing herbal remedies, elimination diets, and allergy management without steroids. Licensure created presumption of pediatric expertise. Solidarity harm. Children with uncontrolled asthma may experience exacerbation and hospitalization because families delayed/avoided inhaled corticosteroids and rescue inhalers. Public health systems bear cost of preventable asthma exacerbations in children diverted to naturopathic care. Roman numeral 3. How Connecticut's statutory choices reveal state values and postures. The question posed in this analysis asks, what does Connecticut's regulatory framework for naturopathic licensure reveal about state values, permissions, and postures? The answer requires analyzing what the state chose to permit, promote, protect, and platform through its statutory choices. A. Permissions. What scope does the state grant? What Connecticut grants? Chapter 373, 20-34, 20-37, PA 14-231. NDs are legally authorized to diagnose disease, prevent disease, treat disease, order laboratory tests and diagnostic imaging, perform procedures using mechanical and material sciences of healing, use naturopathic methods undefined except by reference to CNME, maintain independent practices without mandatory referral relationships to medical doctors. Absent guardrails. No requirement for specialty training in conditions listed. Pediatrics, oncology, psychiatry, autoimmune disease. No mandatory risk disclosure for non-evidence-based modalities. No requirement to halt practice of modality and refer if treatment is not working. No integration with evidence-based specialists for complex cases. No restriction on scope of conditions claimed treatable. No requirement to distinguish evidence level for different modalities. What this reveals about state values. The state has permitted a profession to operate with broad diagnostic and treatment authority without tying scope to evidence-based competence. This reveals a state value. Institutional legitimacy and professional autonomy take precedence over evidentiary alignment. B. Promotions. How does the state actively advance naturopathy? Statutory provisions that promote ND status. 1. Statutory grounding in science. Statute declares naturopathy the science, art, and practice of healing by natural methods. This declaratory language grants scientific prestige without evidentiary verification. Comparable to saying homeopathy is science, legislative assertion, not scientific fact. 2. Parity language. Law treats NDs as a licensed health profession comparable to acupuncturists, massage therapists. Yet acupuncture is practiced without meridian energy claims being endorsed. Massage is not claimed as disease treatment. ND licensure bundles diverse practices, some evidence supported, most not, under a single professional identity which promotes a unified image. 3. Insurance and CPT code recognition. Some insurance plans recognize NDs for reimbursement under medical CPT codes, including 99204 through 99215 office visit codes. This recognition by payers, made possible by licensure, extends ND reach and legitimacy. State licensure does not cause insurance coverage, but creates legal foundation enabling it. 4. Educational pathway validation. By recognizing CNME-accredited schools as qualifying for licensure, state implicitly validates CNME standards. CNME curricula includes vitalism, homeopathy, energy medicine. These are institutionally endorsed through recognition. What this reveals about state values. The state actively promotes naturopathy through legislative language asserting scientific validity and professional parity despite substantial evidence-based gaps. This reveals a state value. Professional credentialing and market legitimacy are prioritized over skeptical scrutiny of knowledge claims. C. Protections. What does the state shield from regulation? What Connecticut statute protects from regulatory scrutiny? 1. CNME-defined scope. Statute ties practice definition to naturopathy as recognized by the Council on Naturopathic Medical Education. This outsources regulatory discretion to a professional body, not to independent science review. Enables regulatory capture. If CNME updates curriculum to include new modality, that modality becomes state authorized without independent review. 2. Broad natural methods authority. Statute authorizes use of natural substances and mechanical and material sciences of healing without specificity. Enables any modality claiming to be natural or mechanical, homeopathy is natural, massage as mechanical, etc. Protects ND scope from scientific scientific challenge if modality falls within broad categories. 3. Title protection without competence verification. State protects use of title, naturopathic physician, ND, etc., does not require demonstrated competence in specific conditions or modalities. Licensure bars unlicensed practice, but does not mandate that licensed practice meet evidence standards. 4. Professional Regulatory Board. Complaints are adjudicated within naturopathic professional system, not by independent medical board. Creates potential for professional solidarity bias, protecting guild interests over consumer protection. Reduces external accountability to evidence-based standards. What this reveals about state values. The state shields naturopathy from the kind of external, evidence-based scrutiny applied to other health professions through medical licensing boards. This reveals a state value. Professional self-regulation and autonomy are prioritized over external oversight and evidence accountability. D. Platforming. Where does the state actively present naturopaths as legitimate? State-facilitated platforms for ND legitimacy. 1. Licensed provider directories. State maintains or permits inclusion of licensed NDs on official healthcare provider listings. Citizens seeking healthcare assume listed providers meet state approval standards. This placement is a form of state platforming, implicit endorsement through proximity to other regulated health professions. 2. Healthcare facility integration. Some Connecticut hospitals have integrated naturopathic services based on ND licensure status. State licensure enables ND inclusion in hospital networks, credentialing committees, patient referral systems. Hospital association confers legitimacy far beyond ND's individual competence. 3. Continuing medical education. Some continuing medical education conferences and health systems include NDs as speakers alongside medical doctors/DOs. Licensure status enables platform access that would otherwise require individual competence vetting. Continuing medical education association implies evidence-comparable expertise. 4. Insurance reimbursement. While state licensure does not require insurance coverage, it enables it. Coverage by payers creates platform effect. Patients see ND on insurance panels and assume evidence-based vetting. State licensure indirectly facilitates payer platforming. What this reveals about state values. The state actively integrates licensed NDs into healthcare infrastructure, hospital systems, provider directories, continuing medical education networks, thus platforming naturopathy as legitimate healthcare. This reveals a state value. Inclusive credentialism takes precedence over evidence-based standards for platform access. E. Synthesis. Connecticut's revealed institutional commitments. Across permissions, promotions, protections, and platforming, Connecticut's statutory and regulatory choices reveal a consistent institutional stance. And this is a table of 3 columns. Value dimension, state choice, revealed commitment. Value dimension, epistemic standards. State choice. Statutory declaration of naturopathy as science without independent evidentiary review. Revealed commitment. Scientific legitimacy granted through legislative fiat, not evidence verification. Value dimension. Professional authority. State choice. Broad scope. Diagnosis, treatment, independent lab ordering without tied evidence requirements. Revealed commitment. Professional autonomy and title protection prioritized over evidentiary alignment with claimed competence. Value dimension. Consumer protection. State choice. Licensure without mandatory informed consent disclosures or risk transparency. Revealed commitment. Consumer protection subordinate to professional credentialing. Value dimension. Institutional accountability. State choice. Regulatory capture through CNME reference and professional self-regulation. Revealed commitment. Professional guild interests prioritized over external evidence-based accountability. Value dimension. Public health integration. State choice. Active incorporation into hospital networks, insurance panels, continuing medical education. Revealed commitment. Institutional legitimacy granted through proximity and platform access rather than evidence review. Value dimension. Vulnerability and equity. State choice. Permitting ND marketing to vulnerable populations, pediatric patients, chronically ill, desperate, without mandatory referral or co-management requirements. Revealed commitment. Allowing profitable targeting of vulnerable groups without structural protection. The overarching revealed value. Connecticut has chosen to prioritize institutional credentialing, professional autonomy, and marketplace expansion over epistemic rigor, evidence-based scope of practice limits, and consumer protection. This is not accident or oversight. It is a deliberate institutional posture that grants state legitimacy to pseudoscientific practice, protects naturopathic professional interests from evidence-based scrutiny, expands the naturopathic marketplace by conferring regulatory legitimacy, shifts responsibility for harm from state to individual bad actor NDs, while the law itself structurally enables harms. Part 3. Quantified harm severity matrix. Severity, likelihood, and CSF dimensions for legislative testimony. The harms, documented above, can be quantified for use in legislative advocacy, rulemaking comment, or professional testimony. This is a table of 6 columns. Harm category, CSF freedom dimension, impacted, severity, potential injury scale, likelihood, frequency in ND population, science camouflage index, notes for testimony. Harm category, homeopathy marketing without efficacy disclosure, CSF freedom dimension impacted, factuality, sovereignty, severity, high, treatment without efficacy delays real treatment, likelihood, high, homeopathy routine in naturopathic practices, science camouflage index, very high, dilutions presented as medicinal. Notes for testimony, risk of delayed antibiotics, antivirals, cancer treatment. Harm category, IgG food testing and elimination diets. CSF freedom dimension impacted. Sovereignty, mobility. Severity, moderate. Nutritional deficiency, opportunity cost. Likelihood, high, common in analyzed Connecticut ND practices. Science camouflage index, high. Marketed as diagnostic, lacks validity. Notes for testimony. Affects vulnerable pediatric and autoimmune populations. Harm category. Pediatric expertise without pediatric training. CSF freedom dimension impacted. Unpredictability, solidarity. Severity, very high. Developmental delay, preventable morbidity. Likelihood, moderate. Some NDs specialize in pediatrics. Science camouflage index, high. Use of primary care doctor language. Notes for testimony, risk to children with autism, ADHD, asthma, infections. Harm category, thermography instead of mammography. CSF freedom dimension impacted. Mobility, factuality. Severity, very high. Delayed breast cancer detection. Likelihood, low. Specific to few NDs. Science camouflage index, very high. False equivalency to mammography. Notes for testimony. Contradicts UCSF, ACR guidance. Harm category, anti-vaccine narrative promotion. CSF freedom dimension impacted. Solidarity, factuality. Severity, very high. Community-level herd immunity risk. Likelihood, moderate to high. Vaccine hesitancy explicit in some ND materials. Science camouflage index, high. Anti-vaccine claims in licensed provider context. Notes for testimony, population-level harm. Immunocompromised individuals at risk. Harm category, financial exploitation via unvalidated testing. CSF dimension impacted. Sovereignty. Severity, high. Financial burden, opportunity cost. Likelihood, very high. Functional testing routine in Connecticut ND practices. Science camouflage index, high. Expensive tests marketed as diagnostic. Notes for testimony, affects low-income families disproportionately. Sidebar. Now, NDs claim, of course, this huge ability to understand science and physiology or function independently from the perplexity thread I ran a chat GPT upon the Connecticut ND source data these reports are based upon. This was the task. Quote, in the attached PDF of naturopaths' practices in Connecticut, in their own words, what can be said scientifically and ethically within the category financial exploitation via unvalidated testing, unquote. Because this is a huge contributor to a practicing ND's nut. I hate to pun, though I do enjoy punning. So therein, I also asked ChatGPT at the end of the above task's results, quote, what can be said about the following comment about your results above? This is a huge contributor to a practicing ND's nut, unquote. The answer, quote, bottom line, substantive claim, largely correct and well supported. A practicing ND's nut is colloquial slang meaning baseline income, overhead coverage, or personal take-home revenue. In context, the speaker is asserting that unvalidated testing is a major revenue driver for naturopathic practices. That substantive claim is supportable by the evidence summarized earlier. The phrasing is a problem, not the underlying point, unquote. Fine, I'll take the hit for the street slang because it comes along with that separate validating assessment. Close sidebar. Harm category. Detoxification claims and programs. CSF freedom dimension impacted. Factuality, sovereignty. Severity, moderate to high. Unnecessary costs, delay of real diagnosis. Likelihood, high. Detox, ubiquitous in naturopathic marketing. Science camouflage index, very high. Undefined toxins, unproven mechanisms. Notes for testimony, exploits health anxiety. Harm category. Treatment of serious conditions. Cancer, autoimmune infections as primary ND responsibility. CSF freedom dimension impacted. Unpredictability. Mobility. Severity, very high. Preventable morbidity/mortality. Likelihood, moderate. Some NDs claim oncology, autoimmune specialties. Science camouflage index, very high. Integrative naturopathic oncology, parity with oncology. Notes for testimony. Risk of substitution versus guideline-based care. Harm category. Informed consent degradation via title/credential inflation. CSF freedom dimension impacted. Sovereignty. Severity, high. Materially false epistemic conditions for consent. Likelihood, very high. Universal in analyzed ND marketing. Science camouflage index, very high. Use of doctor, physician without medical doctor equivalency disclaimers. Notes for testimony. Affects all ND patients. Part 4. Policy implications and legislative recommendations. Based on the CSF analysis and documented harms, policy options include Option A. Strict evidential scope limitation. Preferred. Change. Amend Chapter 373 to restrict ND scope to modalities with evidence-based support defined by medical consensus bodies, e.g., treatments listed in current Cochrane reviews as having moderate or high evidence. Eliminates homeopathy, energy medicine, most constitutional hydrotherapy. Retains acupuncture with neurophysiological mechanism, not meridian-based framing. Note, the practice of acupuncture may have limited evidence for certain indications when decoupled from meridian metaphysics, but current ND statutory authorization does not require or enforce that decoupling and therefore still licenses pseudoscientific explanatory models. Requires evidence by indication. Acupuncture for some pain, not all diseases. Caps scientific camouflage index by removing non-evidence modalities from statutory scope. Option B, mandatory informed consent disclosures. Change. Require NDs to provide written disclosure before treatment initiation. Evidence level for each modality. Evidence-based, evidence-mixed, no evidence. Situations requiring medical doctor/DO referral. Acute symptoms. Serious diagnoses. Medication interactions. ND scope limitations versus medical doctor scope. Risks of treatment delay. Effect. Restores informational basis for sovereignty. Helps patients correct false presumptions of equivalency. Option C. Integrated care requirements. Change. Mandate that NDs maintain regular consultation relationships with medical doctors/DOs for pediatric cases, cancer patients, patients with autoimmune or infectious disease. Effect. Reduces diversion from guideline-based care, improves unpredictability by anchoring complex cases in evidence-based co-management. Option D, regulatory capture prevention. Change. Remove CNME from statute. Substitute independent evidence review body for scope definition. Establish naturopathic regulation within medical board rather than separate board. Require external non-naturopath members on an ND regulatory board. Effect. Reduces professional self-regulation bias. Improves accountability to evidence standards rather than guild interests. Option E, consumer protection and marketing standards. Change. Establish regulations prohibiting use of doctor or physician without naturopathic modifier and training level disclaimer, marketing unproven modalities for serious conditions without disclaimer, advertising specific disease cure or prevention claims without supporting evidence. Effect. Lowers science camouflage index, restores factuality by clarifying ND scope and evidence limitations. Part 5, conclusion. Connecticut's institutional choice. Connecticut's Chapter 373, as amended by PA 14-231, represents an institutional choice to grant state legitimacy to pseudoscientific practice while maintaining legal distance through credentialing language. The framework, ostensibly about professional standardization and consumer protection, has instead created a platform for epistemic conflation and systematic freedom erosion across 5 dimensions identified by Snyder. When analyzed through the Cullen-Snyder framework, epistemic integrity is degraded, science camouflage index elevated by statutory declaration of naturopathy as science, institutional legitimacy score artificially inflated through licensure without evidentiary alignment. Factuality is compromised. Patients cannot distinguish validated from non-validated therapies when all are delivered under a state license and physician framing. Sovereignty is corrupted. Informed consent occurs under false epistemic premises. Patients believe they are exercising autonomous choice when making decisions based on misrepresented scope and evidence. Unpredictability increases. Treatment pathways and outcomes become contingent on ND variation rather than evidence-based protocols. Mobility is constrained. Apparent expansion of options, ND as choice, masks actual narrowing of real access to effective care through early diversion from guideline-based pathways. Solidarity is eroded. Public health norms, vaccination, evidence-based screening, guideline treatment compete with state-legitimized alternative narratives. Vulnerable populations disproportionately harmed. Connecticut's regulatory posture reveals an institutional commitment to professional autonomy and marketplace legitimacy over evidential rigor, consumer protection, and public health. This posture is sustained by outsourcing epistemic standards to professional bodies, CNME, rather than independent science review, protecting ND scope from external evidence-based scrutiny through broad, undefined modality categories, platforming NDs through hospital integration, insurance recognition, and healthcare infrastructure inclusion, shifting accountability from state-enabled harms to individual bad actor NDs. To restore epistemic integrity and freedom, Connecticut should either substantially restrict ND scope to modalities with robust evidence, option A, or substantially increase consumer protections and referral requirements to mitigate harms enabled by current broad scope, options B through E. The current framework prioritizes professional interests over public health and individual freedom. Regulatory reform should align institutional choices with evidence-based medicine, informed consent principles, and genuine consumer protection." Unquote. Appendix to Episode 17, Part C's final report. Table of Contents. A. An independent analysis of the 2026 Connecticut ND practices data through ChatGPT and extrapolations. B. a comparison of those results to the results of the final report to determine any disparity. C. A reverse-engineered speculation as to why the NDs in Connecticut do what they do based upon upstream naturopathy doctrines, commitments, and paradigms. D. A comparison of that reverse-engineered task with the final report. E. An application of the Cullen-Snyder framework to the results from A and C. Appendix Part A ChatGPT analysis of the Connecticut practices data. A1. I decided to do an independent analysis of the 2026 practice data from the Connecticut ND scene through a fresh ChatGPT task. At the end of all this, the initial tasking was through Perplexity. And so the goal is to use a separate method to see if the same results occur. The PDF source data was analyzed with this tasking through ChatGPT. Quote, can you create a table of unvalidated laboratory testing contained within the attached PDF document? Also create a table of refuted or very weakly supported therapies. 2. For each table, include a column detailing what naturopaths are using the specified test or therapy for, unquote. The answer, quote, below are 2 structured tables derived from the attached PDF. I have categorized these items based on unvalidated/clinically unsupported laboratory testing, tests lacking mainstream validation, poor reproducibility or weak clinical utility, refuted or very weakly supported therapies, interventions contradicted by established biomedical science or supported only by low-quality evidence for the stated indications. Table 1. Unvalidated or poorly validated laboratory testing. And this is a table of 4 columns. Test/panel, how it is described or implied in the PDF, what naturopaths are using it for, evidence status. Test/panel, specialty Lyme and co-infection testing, non-standard labs. How it is described, specialty Lyme and co-infection testing with Lyme-specific lab vendors. What naturopaths are using it for, diagnosis and monitoring of chronic Lyme disease and tick-borne illness. Evidence status. Many specialty Lyme labs use non-CDC criteria, high false positive rates, not endorsed by IDSA/CDC for routine diagnosis. Test/panel, food allergy sensitivity testing. How it is described, listed among specialty panels, what naturopaths are using it for, identifying food triggers for allergies, autoimmune disease, GI symptoms, behavioral disorders, evidence status, IgG food sensitivity testing lacks clinical validity. Professional allergy societies advise against it. Test/panel, organic acid testing, OAT. How it is described, organic acid and amino acid testing, what naturopaths are using it for, assessing metabolic dysfunction, mitochondrial issues, neuropsychiatric conditions, autism, chronic fatigue, evidence status, limited validation, high biological variability, no consensus diagnostic utility. Test/panel, amino acid testing, functional panels. How it is described, listed with specialty testing, what naturopaths are using it for, nutritional optimization, mood disorders, fatigue, evidence status, rarely clinically indicated, outside defined metabolic disorders. Test/panel, DNA methylation testing, MTHFR panels. How it is described, DNA methylation testing, what naturopaths are using it for, explaining chronic illness, infertility, psychiatric symptoms, guiding supplement protocols, evidence status, routine MTHFR testing not recommended for most conditions, poor clinical actionability. Test/panel, neurotransmitter testing, urine panels, how it is described, neurotransmitter testing, what naturopaths are using it for, diagnosing anxiety, depression, ADHD, behavioral disorders, evidence status. Peripheral neurotransmitter levels do not reflect central nervous system levels, not validated. Test/panel, adrenal stress index, salivary cortisol panels, how it is described, adrenal stress index testing, what naturopaths are using it for, diagnosing adrenal fatigue, chronic fatigue, stress disorders, evidence status, adrenal fatigue not recognized by endocrinology, testing not diagnostic for a real disease entity. Test/panel, specialty autoimmune prognostic panels, how it is described, specialty autoimmune prognostic and maintenance testing, what naturopaths are using it for, monitoring autoimmune progression outside standard rheumatologic markers, evidence status, utility unclear, not standard of care. Test/panel, cardiovascular genetic testing, functional genomics panels, how it is described, cardiovascular genetic testing, what naturopaths are using it for, personalized prevention, risk modification, evidence status, often low predictive value beyond standard risk calculators. Test/panel, extensive root cause lab panels, how it is described, we order extensive lab tests to get to the root cause, what naturopaths are using it for, broad chronic illness evaluation, fatigue, hormones, gut issues, Lyme, mood, evidence status, risk of overtesting, false positives, incidental findings without clear clinical utility. Table 2, refuted or very weakly supported therapies. And this is a 4-column table. Therapy, how it is promoted in the PDF, what naturopaths are using it for, evidence status. Therapy, homeopathy, how it is promoted, listed as core modality, what naturopaths are using it for, chronic disease, immune dysfunction, mental health conditions, evidence status, biologically implausible, high-quality trials show no effect beyond placebo. Therapy, low-dose immunotherapy, LDI, how it is promoted, listed among modalities, what naturopaths are using it for, allergies, autoimmune disease, Lyme disease, evidence status, not supported by mainstream immunology, insufficient high-quality evidence. Therapy, supportive oligonucleotide therapy, SOT, how it is promoted for Lyme disease, what naturopaths are using it for, chronic Lyme disease, evidence status, not FDA approved for Lyme, lacks robust clinical trials, experimental and controversial. Therapy, craniosacral therapy, how it is promoted for fibromyalgia, TBI, anxiety, depression, what naturopaths are using it for, pain, concussion, PTSD, psychiatric disorders, evidence status, mechanism unsupported, systematic reviews find insufficient evidence. Therapy, IV vitamin infusion therapy, how it is promoted, used for anti-aging, detox, fatigue, Lyme, immune enhancement, what naturopaths are using it for, chronic fatigue, cancer support, immune boosting, migraines. Evidence status. Routine IV vitamin therapy lacks strong evidence outside defined deficiencies. Therapy. Hyperbaric oxygen therapy, HBOT, for Lyme/chronic illness. How it is promoted. Marketed for healing and recovery. What naturopaths are using it for. Lyme disease, chronic fatigue, immune dysfunction. Evidence status. Approved for specific conditions, e.g. decompression sickness. Not validated for chronic Lyme. Therapy. Infrared sauna/detoxification. How it is promoted. Promoted as adjunct therapy. What naturopaths are using it for. Detox, chronic illness, inflammation, evidence status. Detoxification claims unsupported. Body's detox handled by liver/kidneys. Therapy. Red light therapy, Seluma. How it is promoted. Offered for wellness and recovery. What naturopaths are using it for. Skin, inflammation, recovery. Evidence status. Some dermatologic uses, modestly supported. Broad systemic claims lack strong evidence. Therapy. acupuncture for systemic disease claims, how it is promoted, used for asthma, IBS, immune disorders, what naturopaths are using it for, chronic pain, GI disorders, immune dysfunction, evidence status. Evidence mixed, plausible for some pain conditions, weak for systemic immune or internal disease claims. Therapy, detoxification protocols, how it is promoted, removal of garbage/toxins, what naturopaths are using it for, heavy metals, infections, chronic illness. Evidence status, non-specific detox claims unsupported without documented toxic exposure. Therapy, adrenal fatigue treatment protocols, how it is promoted, adrenal health focus, what naturopaths are using it for, chronic fatigue, stress, mood disorders, evidence status, adrenal fatigue, not recognized medical diagnosis. Sidebar. Let me speak directly about adrenal fatigue by way of Google's Gemini AI search assistant. The task presented was, quote, on a scale of 0 through 10, with 10 being the most bogus. How bogus, in modern scientific terms, is the alternative medicine diagnosis adrenal fatigue, unquote? The answer, quote, on a scale of 0 through 10, with 10 being the most bogus, completely unscientific/fake, and 0 being scientifically validated, adrenal fatigue is rated a 9 to 10 by the consensus of modern scientific and endocrinology communities. It is widely considered a medical myth or pseudoscience rather than a legitimate medical diagnosis. Why adrenal fatigue is considered bogus, 10 of 10. No physiological basis. The core premise that chronic stress burns out the adrenal glands, causing them to produce less cortisol, is false. In reality, chronic stress generally causes the adrenal glands to produce more cortisol, not less. Scientific debunking. A 2016 systematic review of over 58 studies found absolutely no evidence to support adrenal fatigue as a legitimate disease. Recognized medical societies agree. The Endocrine Society, which represents experts in hormone-related diseases, does not recognize adrenal fatigue. Dangerous alternatives. The diagnosis is often used by alternative practitioners to sell unregulated, expensive supplements, which may, in some cases, actually damage the adrenal glands. Misleading symptoms. The symptoms attributed to adrenal fatigue, brain fog, lethargy, are real, but they are nonspecific and usually indicate other treatable medical issues like thyroid disease, sleep apnea, anemia, or depression. Important distinction. Adrenal fatigue should not be confused with adrenal insufficiency, such as Addison's disease, which is a serious, scientifically recognized condition where the adrenal glands are damaged or dysfunctional and cannot produce enough hormones. Why it gets a 9 out of 10 instead of a 10 out of 10, the why behind the myth. The only reason the concept persists is because it addresses genuine chronic and often unexplained symptoms of stress, burnout, that, in the past, conventional medicine sometimes failed to address comprehensively. While the mechanism, adrenal glands becoming tired, is totally fraudulent, the patient's fatigue is usually real, unquote. Close sidebar. Observational summary. From a biomedical standards perspective, the laboratory strategy reflects functional medicine paradigms, emphasizing broad screening and root cause discovery, often using non-validated specialty panels. The therapeutic model heavily incorporates modalities that range from weakly supported, e.g. IV vitamin therapy for non-deficiency states, to scientifically implausible, e.g. homeopathy. Several interventions, e.g. HBOT, IV therapy, are legitimate in narrowly defined indications, but are being extended here into non-evidence-based chronic illness contexts, especially chronic Lyme disease, unquote. A policy analysis matrix was then created, structured across 4 domains: public health, ethics, commerce, and scientific integrity. Quote, Table 3. policy analysis table, unvalidated laboratory testing. And this is a 5-column table: test/practice, public health implications, ethical issues, commerce/financial structure, scientific integrity concerns. Test/practice, specialty Lyme and co-infection panels, public health implications, risk of overdiagnosis of chronic Lyme, prolonged unnecessary treatment, antibiotic misuse risk, ethical issues, informed consent concerns if false positive rates not disclosed, commerce/financial structure, often out of network, self-pay specialty labs, reoccurring monitoring, scientific integrity concerns, uses non-standard criteria, outside CDC/IDSA consensus, low specificity, test/practice, IgG food sensitivity panels, public health implications, dietary restriction in children/adults without true allergy, nutritional harm, ethical issues, patients may believe validated allergy testing was performed, commerce/financial structure, cash pay specialty testing, frequent repeat panels, scientific integrity concerns, IgG reflex exposure, not pathology, major allergy societies advise against use, test/practice, organic acid/amino acid functional panels, public health implications, overdiagnosis of metabolic dysfunction, supplement cascades, ethical issues, risk of creating disease identity without validated pathology, commerce/financial structure, high-margin specialty labs, and supplement sales, scientific integrity concerns, poor reproducibility, weak clinical utility evidence, test/practice, DNA methylation testing, MTHFR, public health implications, medicalization of common polymorphisms, unnecessary lifelong supplementation, ethical issues, genetic information without clear actionability, risk of genetic determinism narratives, commerce/financial structure, testing bundled with supplement protocols, scientific integrity concerns, routine clinical utility not supported by mainstream genetics societies, test/practice, neurotransmitter urine testing, public health implications, psychiatric mismanagement based on invalid peripheral markers, ethical issues, false reassurance or misdirection in mental health care, commerce/financial structure, lab to supplement pipeline model, scientific integrity concerns, peripheral levels do not reflect CNS neurotransmission, test/practice, adrenal stress index, salivary cortisol for adrenal fatigue, public health implications, delayed diagnosis of real endocrine disease, normalization of non-disease entity, ethical issues, promotion of a non-recognized diagnosis, commerce/financial structure, repeat testing and adrenal supplement sales, scientific integrity concerns, adrenal fatigue not recognized by endocrinology, test/practice, broad root cause extensive lab panels, public health implications, over-testing, incidental findings, patient anxiety, ethical issues, information overload without validated decision pathways, commerce/financial structure, high-cost intake model, follow-up revenue, scientific integrity concerns, phishing expedition diagnostics, outside evidence-based algorithms. Table 4, Policy Analysis Table, Weakly Supported or Refuted Therapies. Therapy, homeopathy. Public health implications, substitution for effective treatment, delayed care risk, ethical issues, disclosure of implausibility often absent, commerce/financial structure, low manufacturing cost, high retail margin, scientific integrity concerns, violates dose-response principles, no credible mechanism. Therapy, low-dose immunotherapy, LDI, LDA, low-dose antigen therapy. Public health implications, immune conditions managed outside established standards. Ethical issues, patients may believe therapy is immunologically validated. Commerce/financial structure, cash pay immunotherapy model, scientific integrity concerns, lacks high-quality RCT evidence outside mainstream immunology. Therapy, supportive oligonucleotide therapy, SOT for Lyme, public health implications, experimental therapy marketed for chronic infection. Ethical issues, therapeutic misconception, gene therapy framing, commerce/financial structure, high-cost infusion model, repeat treatments, scientific integrity concerns, not FDA approved for Lyme, insufficient clinical trial data. Therapy, craniosacral therapy, public health implications, used for TBI, PTSD, fibromyalgia without strong evidence. Ethical issues, suggestion of neurologic manipulation without anatomical basis. Commerce/financial structure, session-based recurring revenue. Scientific integrity concerns. Mechanism, CSF rhythm manipulation, not anatomically supported. Therapy, IV vitamin infusions, non-deficiency states, public health implications, infection risk, unnecessary invasive procedure. Ethical issues, patients may believe IV is inherently superior. Commerce/financial structure, high-margin infusion services, scientific integrity concerns, limited evidence outside specific deficiency or oncology indications. Therapy, HBOT for chronic Lyme/fatigue, public health implications, off-label use beyond approved indications. Ethical issues, conflation of approved and unapproved uses, commerce/financial structure, capital-intensive service, reoccurring sessions. Scientific integrity concerns, evidence limited for chronic Lyme, extrapolation beyond approved uses. Therapy, infrared sauna/detox protocols, public health implications, reinforces toxin narrative, may delay real diagnosis. Ethical issues, misrepresentation of physiological detox mechanisms. Commerce/financial structure, add-on wellness services, scientific integrity concerns. Detox lacks biochemical specificity, liver/kidney already perform detoxification. Therapy, acupuncture for systemic disease claims, public health implications, may replace standard therapy for asthma, autoimmune disorders. Ethical issues, chi/meridian explanations conflict with biological models. Commerce/financial structure, session-based revenue, repeat visits, scientific integrity concerns. Evidence modest for pain, weak for immune or systemic disease. Therapy, adrenal fatigue treatment protocols, public health implications, misdiagnosis of fatigue syndromes, ethical issues, disease labeling without medical recognition, commerce/financial structure, supplement protocols and monitoring, scientific integrity concerns, non-recognized condition in endocrinology. Cross-domain structural observations. 1. Public health pattern. Chronic, medically ambiguous conditions, Lyme, autoimmune, fatigue, ASD, ADHD, anxiety, are prominent. Diagnostic expansion increases prevalence through broader case definitions, risk of delayed conventional care. 2. Ethical pattern. Strong root cause narrative may create therapeutic optimism not matched by evidence. Potential for therapeutic misconception. Patients believe therapies are established medical standards. Inadequate distinction between approved uses and experimental extensions. 3. Commerce pattern. Predominantly self-pay model. Revenue stacking. Extended visits lead to specialty labs, which lead to supplement dispensary, which lead to infusion services, which lead to device therapies. Vertical integration. Testing and interpretation and supplement sales. 4. Scientific integrity pattern. Use of biologically implausible models, homeopathy. Extension of legitimate technologies, HBOT, IV therapy, beyond validated indications. Functional medicine diagnostics, often lacking reproducibility and consensus validation. Reliance on mechanism-based speculation rather than outcomes-based evidence. Policy-level framing, Connecticut context. From a regulatory standpoint, the model reflects scope of practice boundary stretching through diagnostic labeling not recognized by specialty boards, parallel diagnostic ecosystem operating outside mainstream evidence hierarchies, commercialized chronic disease niche market serving patients dissatisfied with conventional care, unquote. So that was the shopping list kind of analysis. In terms of A1's, quote, an independent analysis of the 2026 practice data from the Connecticut ND seen through a fresh ChatGPT task, unquote, and its extension into, quote, a policy analysis matrix structured across 4 domains, public health, ethics, commerce, and scientific integrity, unquote. As a reminder, the initial tasking was done through Perplexity and casually titled The Polished Report. Below, as A2, is a version of the above that's academically formal, again stressing laboratory and therapy language as stated by naturopaths from the source document covering their 107 practices or marketing/public portals, all obtained through google.com's search. This is a portion of how far forward of their skis they get. A2, Formal Academic Style Section, Publication Ready Draft. Diagnostic Expansion and Therapeutic Boundary Stretching in Connecticut Naturopathic Practice. Abstract. This analysis examines laboratory testing and therapeutic modalities promoted within Connecticut naturopathic clinical materials. Findings demonstrate a recurrent pattern of 1. Diagnostic expansion through non-validated laboratory panels. 2. Therapeutic boundary extension of legitimate medical technologies beyond approved indications. And 3. Integration of commercially incentivized service models. These practices raise concerns across public health, ethics, commerce, and scientific integrity domains. Introduction. Licensed naturopathic physicians in Connecticut operate under a statutory scope that permits laboratory testing and various therapeutic modalities. However, clinical materials reveal frequent reliance on specialty laboratory panels, e.g. IgG food sensitivity testing, organic acid testing, methylation panels, and non-standard infectious disease diagnostics. Concurrently, therapies such as homeopathy, low-dose immunotherapy, craniosacral therapy, IV nutrient infusions, hyperbaric oxygen therapy, HBOT, and detoxification regimens are promoted for chronic, medically ambiguous conditions. Methods. Documents were analyzed for diagnostic tools outside mainstream consensus guidelines, therapies with weak, refuted, or extrapolated evidence bases. Stated clinical indications. Implied commercial structure. Results. Diagnostic practices. Non-validated laboratory modalities are commonly used to diagnose chronic Lyme disease, identify food sensitivities via IgG panels, address adrenal fatigue, detect methylation abnormalities, MTHFR polymorphisms, quantify neurotransmitter imbalances via urine testing. These practices deviate from consensus recommendations issued by specialty medical societies, infectious disease, allergy/immunology, endocrinology, psychiatry. Therapeutic practices. Modalities include homeopathy, biologically implausible under established pharmacology, low-dose immunotherapy, LDI/LDA, supportive oligonucleotide therapy, SOT for Lyme, IV vitamin infusions for non-deficiency states, HBOT for chronic Lyme/fatigue, craniosacral therapy, detoxification protocols. Several therapies represent extrapolation beyond FDA-approved or evidence-supported indications. Discussion. The pattern reflects 1. Diagnostic expansion in conditions characterized by clinical uncertainty. 2. Commercial bundling of laboratory testing and supplement regimens. 3. Blurring of experimental and established therapeutic categories. 4. Reinforcement of disease identity through repeated monitoring. Conclusion. The analyzed materials reveal a parallel diagnostic and therapeutic ecosystem operating adjacent to mainstream standards of care. This ecosystem presents regulatory, ethical, and public health challenges that merit structured oversight review. Unquote. A3. A risk stratification scoring model. Scoring domains, 0 through 3 scale each. Evidence deficit, biological implausibility, patient harm risk, delay risk, commercial intensity, total, and a total risk level. Aggregate risk categories, 0 through 4 low, 5 through 8 moderate, 9 through 12 high, 13 through 15 severe regulatory concern. This is an 8-column table. Intervention, evidence deficit, implausibility, harm risk, delay risk, commercial intensity, total, and a total risk level. Intervention, homeopathy, evidence deficit, 3, implausibility, 3, harm risk, 1, delay risk, 3, commercial intensity, 2, total, 12, risk level, high. Intervention, SOT for Lyme, evidence deficit, 3, implausibility, 2, harm risk, 2, delay risk, 3, commercial intensity, 3, total, 13, risk level, severe. Intervention, IgG food panels, evidence deficit, 3, implausibility, 1, harm risk, 2, delay risk, 2, commercial intensity, 3, total, 11, risk level, high. Intervention, adrenal fatigue testing, evidence deficit, 3, implausibility, 2, harm risk, 1, delay risk, 2, commercial intensity, 3, total, 11, risk level, high. Intervention, IV vitamin therapy, non-deficiency, evidence deficit, 2, implausibility, 1, harm risk, 2, delay risk, 2, commercial intensity, 3, total, 10, risk level, high. Intervention, HBOT, chronic Lyme, evidence deficit, 2, implausibility, 1, harm risk, 2, delay risk, 2, commercial intensity, 3, total, 10, risk level, high. Intervention, craniosacral therapy, evidence deficit, 3, implausibility, 2, harm risk, 1, delay risk, 2, commercial intensity, 2, total, 10, risk level, high. Intervention, organic acid testing, evidence deficit, 3, implausibility, 1, harm risk, 1, delay risk, 2, commercial intensity, 3, total, 10, risk level, high. Intervention, acupuncture, systemic disease claims, evidence deficit, 2, implausibility, 1, harm risk, 1, delay risk, 2, commercial intensity, 2, total, 8, risk level, moderate. A4, integrated interpretation. Across all analyses, A1 through A3, the central issue is not mere alternative modality use. It is the systematic layering of diagnostic expansion, therapeutic extrapolation, and vertically integrated revenue structures under licensure protection. The most concerning items involve experimental biologic claims, SOT, immunologically invalid testing, IgG food panels, non-recognized disease constructs, adrenal fatigue, unquote. And that's the end of Appendix Part A. Appendix Part B, a comparison of the ChatGPT ND practice data results to the results of the final report. B. Via Perplexity, the task was, quote, do the findings of the attached PDF corroborate or contradict the findings in the attached docx, unquote. The PDF was the ChatGPT results from Part A just above, and the docx was the final report, which was done through Perplexity. The answer, quote, they are mutually reinforcing. The PDF's findings are a concrete case study that corroborates and operationalizes the docx report's higher-level claims, not a contradiction. How they line up. The docx argues that Connecticut's ND licensure structure enables pseudoscientific diagnostic and treatment practices, e.g. homeopathy, IgG food panels, adrenal fatigue, chronic Lyme constructs, under the mantle of science and physician titles, producing epistemic and freedom harms in the Colin Snyder sense. The PDF catalogs exactly those kinds of practices in Connecticut ND marketing. Unvalidated Lyme labs, IgG food sensitivity tests, OAT, MTHFR, adrenal stress panels, homeopathy, SOT for Lyme, LDI, detox protocols, IV vitamins, HBOT for chronic Lyme, etc., and then builds a policy matrix showing public health, ethical, commercial, and scientific integrity concerns. Relationship between the two documents. Conceptually, the docx provides the theoretical and legal framework, Colin Snyder, Statutory Analysis of Chapter 373/PA14-231, Harm Typology, and Options A through E for Reform. Empirically and analytically, the PDF provides detailed examples, tables, and a risk stratification model that instantiate those harms in actual Connecticut naturopathic marketing and practice patterns, then explicitly maps them onto public health, ethics, commerce, and scientific integrity, exactly the domains the docx says licensure is distorting. There are some differences in emphasis. The docx is statute/values/CSF heavy. The PDF is practice/policy matrix heavy, but on substance they align. The PDF strengthens the docx's claims rather than challenging them, unquote. Appendix Part C, a reverse-engineered speculation as to why the NDs in Connecticut do what they do based upon upstream naturopathy doctrines, commitments, and paradigms. C. The task to ChatGPT was, quote, from the results and evaluations that were just determined, can you work backward and surmise what aspects of the naturopathy approach, i.e. claimed theory, principles, commitments, biases, unwavering paradigms, etc., contribute to what these Connecticut NDs are doing and claiming, unquote. The answer, quote, below is a reverse engineering analysis, starting from the diagnostic expansion, therapeutic extrapolation, and commercial bundling identified in the Connecticut materials, and inferring the underlying theoretical commitments, epistemic assumptions, and structural biases within contemporary naturopathic doctrine that plausibly generate those behaviors. This is not an attribution of motive. It is a structural inference from observed patterns. Roman numeral 1. Core doctrinal commitments driving diagnostic expansion. 1. Vitalism, vis medicatrix naturae. Commitment. The body possesses an intrinsic self-healing intelligence that can be supported or obstructed. Operational consequence. Chronic illness is framed as dysregulation of a healing force rather than discrete pathology. Emphasis shifts from lesion-based diagnostics to imbalance detection. Behavioral output observed. Use of broad functional panels. Organic acids, methylation, neurotransmitters. Search for subtle dysregulation rather than clinically validated disease. Acceptance of constructs like adrenal fatigue. Epistemic feature. Mechanism speculation is considered sufficient even without validated outcome data. 2. Root cause reductionism. Functional medicine model. Commitment. All chronic disease arises from upstream biochemical or environmental root causes, operational consequence, chronic, medically ambiguous conditions, fatigue, Lyme, autoimmune, ASD, become diagnostic expansion zones. Testing cascades are justified as uncovering hidden drivers. Behavioral output observed. Extensive laboratory panels beyond consensus guidelines. Repeated retesting to track optimization. Bias introduced. Confirmation bias towards abnormal findings in high variance lab panels. 3. Holism as diagnostic totalism. Commitment. Illness is systemic. Isolated pathology is reductionist. Operational consequence. Single disease frameworks are rejected. Multi-system dysfunction narratives become default. Behavioral output observed. Lyme linked to immune dysfunction, gut permeability, mitochondrial impairment. Food sensitivity linked to autoimmune disease, mood disorders, etc. Risk. Diagnostic inflation and explanatory overreach. Roman numeral 2. Doctrinal features driving therapeutic boundary stretching. 4. Therapeutic order hierarchy. Naturopathic doctrine emphasizes 1. Remove obstacles to cure. 2. Stimulate the healing force. 3. Strengthen weakened systems. 4. Use natural substances. 5. Use pharmacologic or invasive interventions last. Effect. Preference for natural interventions even if evidence is weak. Reinterpretation of high technology interventions, HBOT, IV therapy, as supportive rather than biomedical. Observed outcome. IV vitamin infusions framed as physiologic optimization. HBOT framed as cellular healing support. 5. Sectarian epistemology. Naturopathy maintains parallel explanatory models. Qi/meridians, acupuncture. Homeopathic potentization. Immune tolerance resetting, LDI. Genetic methylation correction, MTHFR protocols. Shared pattern. Internal coherence with the naturopathic paradigm is prioritized over external scientific consensus. Consequence. Lack of falsifiability standards aligned with mainstream medicine. Acceptance of therapies refuted in broader biomedical literature, e.g. homeopathy. 6. Chronic Lyme as a paradigm case. Chronic Lyme functions as a symbolic exemplar of medicine missing the root cause, a rhetorical validation of diagnostic expansion, a patient recruitment magnet for complex chronic illness. The paradigm. Mainstream medicine underdiagnoses, leading to specialty testing reveals hidden infection, leading to immune modulation restores balance. This logic naturally supports specialty labs, experimental therapies, e.g. SOT, long treatment arcs. Roman numeral 3, structural cognitive biases embedded in the model. A. Over-detection bias. High-volume specialty testing increases the probability of abnormalities. B. Mechanism over outcomes bias. Biochemical plausibility, even speculative, substitutes for randomized controlled outcome validation. C. Naturalistic fallacy. Natural equated with safe and appropriate. D. Therapeutic escalation bias. Failure to improve leads to reinterpret as deeper imbalance, which leads to add therapies. Roman numeral 4. Economic philosophical feedback loop. The model contains built-in financial reinforcement mechanisms. 1. Extended intake visits. 2. Specialty laboratory interpretation. 3. Supplement protocols. 4. Infusion/device services. 5. Ongoing monitoring. This does not require bad faith. It is structurally self-reinforcing. The doctrine supports continuous optimization, chronic disease reframing, longitudinal therapeutic engagement. Roman numeral 5. Institutional and identity commitments. 1. Distinct professional identity. Naturopathy defines itself partly in opposition to conventional medicine. This identity tension incentivizes alternative explanatory frameworks, rewards paradigmatic divergence. 2. Historical continuity with 19th century vitalism. Homeopathy and other modalities persist not because of new evidence, but because they are foundational identity pillars. Removing them would destabilize professional distinctiveness. Roman numeral 6. Unwavering paradigms that appear operational. From the Connecticut materials, the following paradigms appear functionally non-negotiable. The body is fundamentally self-healing. Chronic illness is under-recognized by mainstream medicine. Lab testing can reveal hidden dysfunction invisible to conventional care. Natural or immune-modulating therapies can restore balance. Optimization is preferable to disease treatment alone. These paradigms logically produce diagnostic boundary expansion, acceptance of low-tier evidence, blending of wellness and medical claims, resistance to mainstream falsification standards. Roman numeral 7, system-level synthesis. Working backward from observed practice patterns, the Connecticut naturopathic approach appears to rest on 1. Vitalist ontology, 2. Functional biochemical reductionism, 3. Holistic systemic framing, 4. Parallel epistemology, 5. Professional identity differentiation. 6. Chronic illness narrative alignment. 7. Optimization-based care model. These commitments together generate high testing utilization, frequent supplement protocols, therapeutic extrapolation, and a commercially sustainable chronic care ecosystem, unquote. Appendix Part D. A comparison of that reverse-engineered task with the final report. D. The D task to ChatGPT was, quote, can you compare the attached reversed engineered documents determinations with those of the attached final report documents? Are they similar, different, complementary, at odds, of larger footprint / smaller footprint, etc., unquote? The answer, quote, Roman numeral 1. High-level characterization, and this is a table of 3 columns. Dimension, reverse-engineered document, final report. Dimension, primary focus, reverse-engineered document. Internal doctrinal architecture of naturopathy, final report. External legal institutional consequences of licensure. Dimension, analytical direction, reverse-engineered document. Bottom-up, practice towards theory. Final report, top-down, statute towards harms. Dimension, tone, reverse-engineered document. Structural diagnostic. Final report, normative policy advocacy. Dimension, target audience, reverse-engineered document. Academic / conceptual. Final report, legislature / regulators / public health actors. Dimension, footprint, reverse-engineered document. Intellectual model. Final report, regulatory and civic system critique. Summary, they are strongly complementary, not at odds. Roman numeral 2, scope and footprint comparison. A. Reverse-engineered document. Footprint, epistemic architecture of naturopathic doctrine. Identifies vitalism, root cause reductionism, sectarian epistemology. Explains why certain practices, IgG testing, SOT, chronic Lyme expansion, logically emerge. It maps internal belief structure towards predictable practice outputs. This is a causal structural analysis. B. Final report. Footprint. Connecticut Statutory Framework. Chapter 373, PA 14-231, Institutional Permissions, Promotions, Protections, and Platforming. Explicit harm categories. Policy remedies. It maps state licensure towards institutional legitimacy towards freedom erosion. This is a regulatory normative analysis. Relative size of analytical footprint. The reverse-engineered document has a narrower but deeper doctrinal footprint. The final report has a broader systemic footprint, incorporating law, public health, institutional behavior, and civic values. The final report contains the reverse-engineered logic implicitly, but does not unpack its philosophical engine as explicitly. Roman numeral 3, epistemic convergence. Both documents converge on the following determinations. And this is a 3-column table. Determination, reverse-engineered, final report. Determination, diagnostic expansion is structural. Reverse-engineered, yes, root cause paradigm. Final report. Yes. Scope and functional testing harms. Determination, therapeutic extrapolation predictable. Reverse engineered. Yes. Therapeutic order plus naturalism bias. Final report. Yes. Homeopathy, oncology parity detox. Determination, parallel epistemology present. Reverse engineered. Yes. Sectarian models. Final report. Yes. Science camouflage index elevated. Determination, chronic Lyme is paradigmatic. Reverse engineered. Yes. Final report. Yes. Determination, financial reinforcement exists. Reverse engineered. Yes. Feedback loop model. Final report. Yes. Conflict of interest analysis. Determination, science camouflage central. Reverse engineered. Implied structurally. Final report. Explicitly quantified. Conclusion, there is strong theoretical alignment. Roman numeral 4, where they differ. 1. Level of causality. Reverse engineered is upstream doctrinal causation. Final report is downstream institutional consequences. The final report assumes the doctrinal engine, but focuses on how the state amplifies it, how licensure encodes it. 2. Normative intensity. The final report is more prosecutorial, explicit about harm severity, legislative in orientation. The reverse engineered document, more descriptive, explicitly disclaims motive attribution, focused on structural inevitability. Thus, reverse engineered is analytic neutrality. Final report is institutional accountability argument. 3. Freedom framework integration. The final report explicitly operationalizes Snyder's 5 freedoms. The reverse engineered document explains why those freedoms would be impacted, but does not directly score them. Thus, reverse engineered provides epistemic causation. Final report provides freedom impact adjudication. 5. Complementarity structure. They function as two halves of a single analytic arc. Reverse engineered. Why does naturopathy generate these practices? Final report. Why does Connecticut licensure magnify their impact on freedom? When combined, doctrinal commitments lead to predictable practice patterns, which lead to elevated science camouflage index, which lead to institutional legitimacy inflation, which lead to freedom degradation, factuality, sovereignty, mobility, unpredictability, solidarity. This chain is coherent across both documents. Roman numeral 6. Any tensions or inconsistencies. There are no material contradictions. However, one subtle difference exists. The reverse engineered document treats financial reinforcement as structural but not necessarily intentional. The final report sometimes frames harms in more direct accountability language, e.g., exploitation, targeting vulnerable populations. There is a difference of rhetorical posture, not analytic contradiction. Roman numeral 7. Relative analytical strengths. Reverse engineered strengths. Explains persistence of refuted modalities. Shows why reform may face doctrinal resistance. Clarifies epistemic self-sealing features. Vitalism, root cause reductionism. Strong for academic publication. Final report strengths. Legislatively actionable. Quantifies harm severity. Maps statutory mechanisms. Identifies erosion vectors. Strong for testimony and regulatory reform. Roman numeral 8. Combined system-level model. If merged into a unified synthesis, the architecture would look like Layer 1, ontology, vitalism, holistic totalism, sectarian epistemology. Layer 2, practice outputs, diagnostic expansion, functional testing cascades, therapeutic extrapolation, chronic Lyme paradigm. Layer 3, institutional amplification, statutory declaration of science, title protection, scope autonomy, CNME outsourcing, platforming. Layer 4, freedom effects, factuality degradation, sovereignty distortion, mobility constraint, unpredictability volatility, solidarity erosion. The reverse engineered document covers layers 1 through 2. The final report covers layers 3 through 4. Roman numeral 9. Overall assessment. Similarity high. Complementarity strong. Direct conflict none. analytical footprint, final report broader, reverse engineered deeper doctrinally. Combined value, substantially stronger than either alone. If unified formally, they would constitute a full-spectrum Collins-Snyder applied monograph, unquote. Within the same ChatGPT standalone thread, this task was also done out of curiosity. Quote, can you compare the attached WNF PDF document to the above results from comparing the reverse-engineered document's determinations with those of the attached final report documents? Is the WNFM document similar, different, complementary, at odds, of larger footprint / smaller footprint, etc., unquote. So that WNFM document is the 2023 material that has been used for earlier analyses and was the centerpiece of the episode 15 podcast. The answer, quote, below is a structured comparison between the WNF compiled PDF and the previously derived reverse-engineered and final report determinations. The comparison follows the same analytic dimensions used earlier: doctrinal architecture, epistemic posture, institutional strategy, and footprint. Roman numeral 1. What the WNF document actually is. The uploaded WNF file is a 1,291-page compiled corpus, including accreditation standards comparison, naturopathic book report, 1,300 plus books, educational program guides, social media guide, condition-specific reports, philosophy white paper, regulation reports, terminology documents, pandemic white paper, strategic plan, global profession definition. This is not a single white paper. It is a profession-level consolidation document that matters for footprint comparison. Roman numeral 2, doctrinal architecture comparison. A. Vitalism and philosophy. The accreditation standards explicitly include naturopathic philosophies, vitalism and holism, white paper grounding in vitalism, natural rhythms, alchemy, astromedicine, as noted in footnotes. Your reverse-engineered analysis identified vitalism as ontologic anchor, holistic totalism, root cause reductionism, sectarian epistemology, determination, high structural similarity. The WNF document openly codifies the philosophical commitments your reverse engineering identified as causal drivers. Difference. Your analysis treats them as epistemic risk factors. WNF treats them as professional foundations. This is a normative divergence, not structural divergence. B. Modalities and diagnostics. The accreditation comparison includes homeopathy, hydrotherapy, nature cure, detox therapies, iridology, pulse diagnosis, tongue diagnosis. Your final report identified diagnostic expansion, science camouflage, homeopathy persistence, functional and non-validated diagnostics. Determination. Again, high structural alignment. The WNF document confirms these modalities are embedded in curriculum. They are not fringe. They are accreditation recognized. This directly reinforces the reverse-engineered thesis that such practices are structurally predictable outputs of doctrine. Roman numeral 3, science camouflage dimension. In the accreditation comparison, biosciences, anatomy, pathology, clinical medicine appear in the same grid as homeopathy, iridology, energetics, spagyrics, detox therapies. This curricular adjacency is crucial. Your final report's science camouflage index critique argued biomedical coursework and non-validated modalities are institutionally fused under one credential. The WNF accreditation grid visually demonstrates that fusion. Determination. The WNF document is empirically complementary to your science camouflage finding. It does not rebut it. It structurally exemplifies it. Roman numeral 4, knowledge ecosystem reinforcement. The 2020 book report section document documents, 1,335 plus books, 73% written after the year 2000, 49% focused on conditions, 41% focused on modalities, heavy representation of nutrition, herbal medicine, homeopathy, detoxification. This supports your reverse-engineered finding that naturopathy sustains an internally produced literature base, a parallel epistemic ecosystem, a self-referential knowledge economy, determination, strongly complementary. Roman numeral 5, regulatory footprint comparison. Reverse-engineered and final report. Jurisdiction, Connecticut. Mechanism, statutory licensure. Focus, freedom impact, Snyder framework. Scale, state-level institutional embedding. WNF document. Scope, 98 countries referenced in book report section. Accreditation bodies across U.S., Canada, Australia, Switzerland. Strategic plan, terminology, regulation reports. Footprint size. This is a table of 3 columns. Dimension, reverse engineered and final, WNF. Dimension, geographic scope, reverse engineered and final, single state, Connecticut, WNF, global. Dimension, institutional reach, reverse engineered and final, legislative and licensure, WNF. Accreditation and international coordination. Dimension, depth of regulatory critique, reverse engineered and final, high, WNF, minimal, descriptive, dimension scale, reverse engineered and final, narrow but deep, WNF, broad and consolidating. The WNF document has a much larger geographic and organizational footprint. Your documents have a deeper evaluative footprint. Roman numeral 6, normative orientation. This is where the divergence is sharpest. Reverse engineered and final report. Evaluative, risk-oriented, concerned with epistemic erosion, freedom impact analysis. WNF document. Profession building, legitimacy seeking, accreditation validating, regulatory harmonization. Thus, and this is a table of 3 columns, question, reverse engineered and final, WNF. Question, is doctrinal integration problematic? Reverse engineered and final, yes. WNF, no. Question, is blending biosciences and vitalism concerning? Reverse engineered and final, yes. WNF, not framed as concern. Question, is global consolidation increasing risk? Reverse engineered and final, possibly. WNF, framed as maturation. These are normatively at odds, but structurally describing the same system. Roman numeral 7, complementarity versus conflict. Complementarity and evidence. The WNF document confirms doctrinal commitments, confirms modality embedding, confirms diagnostic pluralism, confirms professional consolidation, confirms global scale. It supplies the primary source material your analysis interprets. At odds in interpretation, your framework evaluates these features as epistemic and public health risks. WNF presents them as strengths and maturation. Thus, they are complementary at the empirical level. They are at odds at the evaluative level. Roman numeral 8, overall determination. Similarity, high in structural content. Different, yes, in normative framing and purpose. Complementary, strongly as profession self-description versus external audit. At odds, yes, regarding epistemic legitimacy and public risk. Footprint, WNF is geographically larger, consolidating, profession-wide. Reverse engineered and final is analytically sharper, jurisdictionally targeted. Roman numeral 9, final synthesis. If layered together, the WNF document, here's what naturopathy is globally, formally, and structurally, and the reverse engineered and final as documents. Here is what structure implies for epistemic integrity and civic freedom when licensed by the state. They are not duplicates, they are not redundant, they are dialectically paired, unquote. Appendix Part E, an application of the CSF to the results from A and C. E, through ChatGPT, this task was assigned, quote, "Can you apply the attached Cullen-Snyder framework to the initial practices evaluation and analysis above and reverse engineering analysis above," unquote. This will be answered twice, first in a very detailed outline form, and then as a more formal but accessible prose version. E1, the answer. Quote, "Below is a structured application of your Cullen-Snyder framework version 1.0 to 1. The initial practices evaluation, unvalidated testing plus weak/refuted therapies, and 2. The reverse engineering doctrinal analysis of underlying naturopathic commitments. The analysis follows your specified structure: epistemic audit, Cullen-based; freedom impact analysis, Snyder-based; institutional evaluation." Roman numeral 1, epistemic audit, Cullen component. A. Science Camouflage Index, SCI. Definition per framework: proportion of science exterior claims presented as science-based. Observed practices, Connecticut ND materials. And this is a table of 4 columns: practice type, scientific presentation style, external scientific status, camouflage level. Practice type: IgG food sensitivity panels. Scientific presentation style: lab-based, biomarker-framed. External scientific status: not clinically validated for pathology. Camouflage level: high. Practice type: adrenal fatigue testing. Scientific presentation style: hormone lab framing. External scientific status: not recognized diagnosis. Camouflage level: high. Practice type: organic acid testing. Scientific presentation style: metabolic biochemistry framing. External scientific status: weak clinical actionability. Camouflage level: moderate to high. Practice type: MTHFR/methylation panels. Scientific presentation style: genomic medicine framing. External scientific status: limited clinical utility. Camouflage level: moderate. Practice type: SOT for Lyme. Scientific presentation style: molecular/genetic therapy framing. External scientific status: experimental, not FDA approved. Camouflage level: very high. Practice type: homeopathy. Scientific presentation style: sometimes diluted science language. External scientific status: biologically implausible. Camouflage level: variable. Moderate when framed scientifically, lower when openly traditional. Assessment: SCI rating: elevated to severe. Rationale: heavy reliance on laboratory aesthetics to confer biomedical legitimacy. Deployment of contemporary biomedical vocabulary. Methylation, neurotransmitters, immune modulation. Conflation of plausibility with validation. Parallel diagnostic ecosystem presented as functionally equivalent to mainstream medicine. This aligns with Cullen's notion of epistemic conflation, blending validated and non-validated claims under a unified scientific presentation. B. Institutional legitimacy score, ILS. Metric: degree of institutional recognition relative to evidentiary support. And this is a table of 4 columns. Domain: institutional status, evidence alignment, gap. Domain: licensure, institutional status, state licensed in Connecticut, evidence alignment, mixed, gap, moderate. Domain: academic infrastructure, institutional status, accredited ND programs, evidence alignment, evidence heterogeneity, gap, moderate. Domain: specialty labs, institutional status, commercial, evidence alignment, low validation, gap, high. Domain: hospital integration, institutional status, limited but present, evidence alignment, variable, gap, moderate. Domain: public perception, institutional status, doctor title, evidence alignment, evidence inconsistent, gap, high symbolic legitimacy. Assessment: ILS, moderate to high symbolic legitimacy / low to moderate evidence concordance. Licensure confers structural authority that may exceed evidentiary grounding of specific modalities. This constitutes an erosion vector in Cullen's terminology. Institutional authority amplifies epistemically weak claims. Roman numeral 2. Freedom Impact Matrix, Snyder Component. Applying Snyder's 5 freedoms as operationalized in your framework. 1. Sovereignty. Patient autonomy versus misinformation risk. Observations. Patients are offered expanded choices. However, diagnostic expansion may be predicated on non-validated constructs. Lab-based authority may reduce critical scrutiny. Freedom assessment. Ambivalent to compromised. Autonomy is formally expanded, but may be epistemically distorted if foundational information lacks accuracy. 2. Unpredictability. Evidence consistency and treatment variability. Observations. Wide inter-practitioner variability. Personalized protocols based on non-standardized labs. Lack of consensus treatment algorithms. Freedom assessment. Reduced unpredictability freedom. Patients face high epistemic unpredictability. Outcomes are less constrained by standardized evidence pathways. 3. Mobility. Healthcare options constrained or preserved. Observations. Parallel diagnostic labeling, e.g. chronic Lyme, adrenal fatigue, may increase perceived options or lock patients into a sectarian explanatory system. Freedom assessment. Conditional constraint. Mobility may narrow if patients internalize paradigmatic distrust of conventional medicine. 4. Factuality. Accuracy of disclosed information. Observations. Blending of validated and non-validated modalities. Laboratory framing conveys implicit scientific endorsement. Freedom assessment. Significant risk to factuality freedom. When science camouflage occurs, access to accurate epistemic boundaries is diminished. This directly triggers the Collins-Snyder interdependence principle. Misrepresented knowledge systems inherently threaten freedom. B. Solidarity. Community health versus individual claims. Observation. Individual optimization prioritized. Public health consensus, e.g., infectious disease guidelines, may be implicitly challenged. Chronic Lyme framing can undermine IDSA/CDC standards. Freedom assessment. Potential erosion of solidarity. Parallel medical epistemology weakens shared factual baselines necessary for collective action. Roman numeral 3. Reverse engineering through the framework. Applying the framework to the inferred doctrinal commitments. A. Vitalism through Collins-Snyder lens. Cullen dimension. Ontological commitment not falsifiable. Provides epistemic immunity to contradictory evidence. Sidebar. A brief list of why vitalism is not falsifiable for the curious, if it hasn't been directly focused on, in 2 parts. A. Why falsifiability is necessary for a claim to be considered scientifically supported. B. Them, vitalism, verifiability failures, both through Google's Gemini. A. Quote, falsifiability is essential for scientific support because it ensures a theory is testable, empirical, and capable of being proven wrong, distinguishing science from belief or pseudoscience. It requires that a claim be subjected to observation or experimentation that could potentially contradict it. Key reasons for the necessity of falsifiability include: distinguishes science from pseudoscience. It separates empirical science from non-scientific claims, such as metaphysics, dogma, or superstition, which cannot be tested. Enables rigorous testing. A valid hypothesis must allow for the possibility of being proven wrong. Otherwise, it is not a scientific claim. A theory that fits all possible scenarios is not informative. Drives scientific progress. Science advances by formulating conjectures, subjecting them to severe, risky tests, and discarding those that fail. Handles empirical evidence. Falsifiability acknowledges that universal statements cannot be proven absolutely true, but can be disproven by a single counterexample. E.g., observing one black swan breaks all swans are white. Ensures tentative knowledge. It recognizes that scientific understanding is always open to revision and improvement based on new evidence. Essentially, for a claim to be scientifically supported, it must be capable of surviving attempts to disprove it, unquote. B, quote, vitalism, the theory that living organisms are governed by a non-physical vital force distinct from chemical/physical laws, is considered non-falsifiable because it operates outside the realm of empirical observation. It functions more as a metaphysical belief than a scientific hypothesis, making it impossible to disprove through experimentation non-physical nature. The vital force is defined as non-material or metaphysical, making it undetectable by physical scientific instruments. Argument from ignorance. Vitalism often serves as a placeholder for unknown biological processes. Discovering a new mechanism does not disprove the existence of a vital principle behind it, it only moves the goalposts. It cannot be isolated. Because the supposed force is thought to pervade all life, there is no way to remove it for a controlled comparative experiment. Metaphysical postulate. Similar to God of the Gaps arguments, vitalism posits an entity that exists beyond the boundary of scientific investigation, thus rendering it immune to empirical falsification. While historically challenged by synthesis experiments, e.g. Wooler's urea synthesis in 1828, which showed organic compounds could be made from inorganic materials, proponents can always argue that the vital force was still present, or that the experiment didn't capture the essence of life itself, unquote. And I think that set is pretty good. Perplexity states, regarding vitalism being unfalsifiable, quote, critics in philosophy of science describe vitalism as a metaphysical overlay that is often viewed as unfalsifiable, since it can always be reinterpreted to accommodate any empirical data, rather than specifying in advance what data would prove it wrong. There is no empirical situation in which the success of material explanations would force abandoning the vital force postulate, unquote. Close sidebar. Snyder dimension undermines factuality when metaphysical constructs are presented as clinical determinants. Sidebar. And I'll deal in a focused manner with the Snyderian idea of factuality. Again via Google's Gemini, quote, in Timothy Snyder's On Freedom, 2024, factuality is defined as the fourth component of positive freedom, functioning as a grounded, verifiable understanding of reality, specifically millions of little truths. Metaphysical ideas are excluded from this definition of factuality because Snyder's concept is designed to act as a defense against the big lies of tyranny, requiring testable, historical, and observable evidence rather than speculative, abstract, or absolute belief systems. Here is why, in the context of On Freedom, metaphysical claims are not considered part of this specific, practical definition of factuality. Factuality is about significant roughness, verification. Snyder defines factuality as confronting significant roughness, which means engaging with challenging, tangible, and often inconvenient truths about the world, e.g. climate data, historical events, economic facts. Metaphysical ideas, by definition, relate to the nature of existence, ultimate reality, or the soul, which cannot be verified or tested through empirical observation or historical investigation. Factuality resists the big lie. For Snyder, factuality is a political defense against authoritarianism, which uses big lies, abstract, all-encompassing narratives, to create an alternative reality. Metaphysical systems can easily be used to construct these kinds of narratives. Freedom requires shared reality, not shared faith. Snyder argues that freedom requires a shared ground of fact, a common understanding of what is happening in the world, which is crucial for cooperation and resisting tyranny. Metaphysical, religious, or ideological claims are often divisive, subjective, and personal, making them unsuitable for the common public foundation of fact-oriented freedom. Metaphysical values versus factual grounding. While Snyder acknowledges that metaphysics or religion can provide a source for the good, such as moral commitments to mercy or grace, he distinguishes this from the factuality needed to navigate the physical world. He argues that we must believe in objective truth, factuality, to make good decisions, but he does not claim that belief systems about the nature of reality are themselves facts. In essence, Snyder distinguishes between knowing the world as it is, factuality, and believing in what it ought to be, metaphysics/values. Factuality is the tool used to verify reality, while metaphysics is a separate, more speculative realm, unquote. That too is pretty good. Close sidebar. B. Root cause paradigm. Cullen. Encourages epistemic expansion zones. Search for invisible dysfunction. Mechanism-based inference substitutes for outcome validation. Snyder promotes unpredictability. No stable evidence thresholds. Risks sovereignty distortion through complexity inflation. Sidebar. I had dealt with the issue of unpredictability when I presented the Cullen-Snyder framework in episode 16, and I acknowledged that as a condition of an individual's existence, unpredictability is needed for freedom. Yet within the healthcare context, unpredictability would be detrimental. The applications in episode 16 were watched and found to handle unpredictability as a negative, as is desired, e.g., you wouldn't want what your doctor does to be unpredictable. For the task, quote, would Tim Snyder agree that healthcare should be scientific and factuality-based, as opposed to metaphysical, and therein unpredictable/non-factuality-based, unquote? Google's Gemini answered, quote, for Snyder, healthcare is not a metaphysical benefit, but a corporeal truth. When healthcare is based on metaphysical constructs rather than clinical science, it becomes a tool for othering and oppression. Scientific, fact-based healthcare provides the reliable physical foundation that allows for the positive unpredictability of a free life, unquote. And I think that is a great answer. Close sidebar. C. Parallel epistemology. Cullen, high epistemic conflation index, internal coherence prioritized over external verification. Snyder, fragments shared factual space, and this threatens solidarity. Reduces factuality freedom. Roman numeral 4, dual subcomponentry assessment per implementation protocol. 1. Epistemic audit summary. Science camouflage index, high. Institutional legitimacy gap, moderate to high. Evidence hierarchy drift, persistent. Erosion vectors, licensure plus lab aesthetics plus biomedical vocabulary. 2. Freedom impact summary, and this is a 2-column table. Freedom and net effect. Freedom, sovereignty, net effect, formally expanded, substantively at risk. Freedom, unpredictability, net effect, increased epistemic volatility. Freedom, mobility, net effect, potential sectarian capture. Freedom, factuality, net effect, most significantly compromised. Freedom, solidarity, net effect, structurally weakened. Roman numeral 5, institutional evaluation. Per framework directive A, does the healthcare system enable positive freedom? Licensure enables expanded access to providers, formal recognition. However, insufficient evidentiary calibration mechanisms allow pseudoscientific infiltration under protected scope. B. Does the system counteract erosion vectors? Current structure does not systematically differentiate evidence tiers within scope, does not require explicit evidence disclosure gradients, relies on compliant-based enforcement rather than epistemic auditing. Thus, institutional buffering against epistemic erosion appears limited. Roman numeral 6, integrated Cullen-Snyder conclusion. Applying your framework to the Connecticut practices yields 1. High epistemic conflation. 2. Moderate institutional amplification of weak claims. 3. Primary freedom threat located in the factuality dimension. 4. Secondary effects in sovereignty and solidarity. 5. Structural reinforcement via professional identity and commercial design. The system does not merely present alternative care, it constructs a parallel epistemic infrastructure whose scientific boundaries are porous while benefiting from state-conferred legitimacy, unquote. E2, the above as a, quote, publication-ready applied case study structured explicitly around the Cullen-Snyder framework version 1.0, unquote. Quote, a Cullen-Snyder applied case study, epistemic conflation and freedom implications in Connecticut naturopathic practice. Abstract. This case study applies the Cullen-Snyder framework for evaluative analysis of naturopathy with regard to Freedom, version 1.0, to a set of Connecticut naturopathic clinical materials. Using a dual analytic structure, 1. Cullen's epistemic audit, and 2. Snyder's Freedom Impact Matrix, the study evaluates diagnostic expansion, therapeutic boundary stretching, and institutional legitimacy effects. Findings indicate a high science camouflage index, moderate to high institutional legitimacy amplification of weakly supported modalities, and measurable impacts on Snyder's factuality, sovereignty, and solidarity freedoms. The analysis demonstrates how epistemic conflation within licensed healthcare environments may function as a structural erosion vector affecting both scientific integrity and civic freedom. Roman numeral 1, Introduction. The Cullen-Snyder framework integrates Cullen's critical epistemology, particularly the concept of epistemic conflation, the blending of scientific and non-scientific claims under a unified legitimacy presentation, and Snyder's freedom theory, particularly factuality freedom, the premise that access to accurate information is a prerequisite for meaningful liberty. This case study applies the framework to Connecticut naturopathic practice materials that promote specialty laboratory testing outside mainstream validation pathways, therapeutic modalities with weak or refuted evidence bases, chronic illness narratives encompassing root cause and immune modulation. The objective is not to adjudicate individual clinical intentions, but to assess systemic epistemic structure and freedom implications. Roman numeral 2, Methodology. The analysis proceeds in 3 stages. 1. Epistemic audit, Cullen component, Science Camouflage Index, SCI, Institutional Legitimacy Score, ILS. 2. Freedom Impact Matrix, Snyder component, Sovereignty, Unpredictability, Mobility, Factuality, Solidarity. 3. Institutional evaluation, assessment of erosion vectors, evaluation of structural safeguards, primary materials, Connecticut naturopathic promotional and clinical content. Roman numeral 3, epistemic audit, Cullen-based. A. Science Camouflage Index, SCI. The analyzed practices include IgG food sensitivity testing, adrenal fatigue salivary cortisol panels, organic acid and amino acid functional testing, MTHFR/methylation panels, neurotransmitter urine testing, supportive oligonucleotide therapy, SOT for Lyme, homeopathy, low-dose immunotherapy, IV vitamin infusion therapy for non-deficiency states, HBOT for chronic Lyme and fatigue. Observed epistemic pattern. 1. Laboratory-based aesthetics confer biomedical legitimacy. 2. Contemporary scientific vocabulary. Genetics, immune modulation, mitochondrial function is used in proximity to low validation practices. 3. Mechanistic plausibility is presented as functional equivalence to clinical validation. SCI determination. Science Camouflage Index, high. The proportion of science exterior claims presented under scientific framing exceeds incidental levels. Epistemic conflation is structural rather than episodic. B. Institutional legitimacy score, ILS. Connecticut licensure grants, diagnostic authority, laboratory ordering authority, protected professional title. However, evidentiary support for several promoted modalities is weak, inconsistent, or absent from consensus specialty guidelines. ILS determination. Symbolic institutional legitimacy, high. Evidence concordance. Mixed to low for identified modalities. This mismatch constitutes a Cullen-defined erosion vector, wherein institutional authority amplifies epistemically unstable claims. 4. Freedom Impact Matrix, Snyder-based. 1. Sovereignty, autonomy versus misinformation risk. Naturopathic practice expands patient choice, however, autonomy depends on accurate epistemic framing. Where laboratory testing or therapies lack clear validation disclosure, sovereignty risks distortion through informational asymmetry. Impact, partially compromised sovereignty. 2. Unpredictability, evidence consistency. Evidence-based medicine constrains unpredictability via standardized diagnostic and therapeutic pathways. In the analyzed materials, individualized protocols rely on non-standardized testing. Treatment algorithms lack external validation. Impact: increased epistemic volatility. 3. Mobility, healthcare pathway flexibility. Parallel diagnostic labeling, e.g. chronic Lyme, adrenal fatigue, may expand perceived options or embed patients within a sectarian explanatory model resistant to mainstream integration. Impact: conditional mobility constraint. Roman numeral 4, factuality, accuracy of information environment. The most significant freedom concern emerges here. The shared factual environment becomes blurred when laboratory markers lacking validation are presented with scientific authority and biologically implausible modalities, e.g. homeopathy, coexist with legitimate biomedical language. Impact: significant risk to factuality freedom. This directly activates the Cullen-Snyder principle of epistemic social interdependence. Misrepresented knowledge systems inherently threaten freedom. 5. Solidarity, collective health baseline. Public health relies on shared factual frameworks, e.g. infectious disease standards. The chronic Lyme paradigm, in tension with consensus infectious disease guidelines, introduces fragmentation of shared medical standards, potential undermining of collective health coherence. Impact: moderate solidarity erosion risk. Roman numeral 5, reverse-engineered doctrinal drivers. The practices reflect underlying commitments. 1. Vitalism, vis medicatrix naturae, encourages imbalanced detection paradigms over lesion-based diagnosis. 2. Root cause reductionism, expands diagnostic territory into subclinical or speculative dysfunction. 3. Holistic totalism, encourages multi-system explanatory integration without evidentiary tiering. 4. Parallel epistemology, internal doctrinal coherence prioritized over external consensus validation. These commitments structurally increase the science camouflage index and reduce factual boundary clarity. Roman numeral 6, institutional evaluation, per framework directive. A. Does the regulatory system reinforce positive freedom? Licensure enhances access and formal choice. However, it does not require tiered evidence disclosure for modalities within scope. B. Does the system counteract erosion vectors? Current structures do not mandate evidence hierarchy transparency, do not differentiate validated from experimental modalities within scope, rely on reactive complaint systems rather than proactive epistemic auditing. Thus, institutional counterweights to epistemic conflation appear limited. Roman numeral 7, synthesis. Applying the Cullen-Snyder framework reveals high epistemic conflation, institutionally amplified legitimacy gaps, primary freedom vulnerability and factuality, secondary vulnerabilities in sovereignty and solidarity. The Connecticut case illustrates how a licensed profession can construct a parallel epistemic infrastructure that operates adjacent to mainstream biomedical standards while benefiting from state-conferred legitimacy. The central freedom risk is not mere therapeutic pluralism. It is the erosion of clear epistemic boundaries necessary for informed autonomy and shared civic knowledge. Roman numeral 8, conclusion. This case study demonstrates the operational value of the Cullen-Snyder framework as an evaluative instrument capable of integrating scientific validity assessment, institutional legitimacy analysis, and political philosophical freedom metrics. Within the Connecticut naturopathic context, the framework identifies structured epistemic conflation and measurable freedom impacts, particularly in the domain of factuality. Future applications could compare this model across other licensed sectarian professions or assess regulatory reforms designed to reduce science camouflage while preserving authentic patient autonomy, unquote. Next up is Part D with follow-up questions to the main perplexity threads. This has been the Naturocrit Podcast. Thank you for boldly listening.
The Naturocrit Podcast.
talking about?